Welcome to SteepleLess Church. We are glad that you were with us. We've just had a great time of worship. And by the way, if you ever want to know what we're doing, what we're singing before we come on, happy to send those to you. If you're formally a home group, if you decide to, even if you're a home group of one, say, hey, I want to be an official home group, we will actually send you that beforehand so you can sing the same songs that we sing if you want to, if that makes sense for you and your group. Whew, I can tell you that it was good here. Hope it was good wherever you are as well. All right, today we're going to be moving into chapter 10 of Matthew. We're just going to look at the first 4 verses. Who am I? I just work here. All right, and this is I think, a really good message if you're a brand new believer. If you haven't spent decades in the Bible, I think today will be really helpful. And maybe you're somebody who, I used to read the Bible a lot, but I haven't for a while. Maybe you need a bit of a refresher. I think today will be helpful for that. And maybe you've been a believer for a very long time, but just haven't, especially as it comes to the people in the Bible, maybe put all the pieces together. I think today will be helpful. So please stick with us. We're going to have an interesting conversation. Before we start, I want to tell a fish tale. And these, by the way, are stories that have happened normally during the week, but not always, of someone in our group, either in this little home group or any of our home groups out there, wherever you're sitting. The fishtail I was going to do was from something that happened actually to me in Michigan this last week, but I'm going to save that because something really cool happened here to one of our other parishioners. One of our steepleless regulars had an event. We'll just call it that. And since she wants to stay anonymous, I'm just going to call her Betty. All right. So Betty was on Facebook Marketplace and was going to purchase something. And so she reached out to ask a clarifying question about this one particular item. And the person responded and gave Betty the answer to that question. But then Betty hadn't responded back. Betty was still kind of thinking about it. And so the person reached out again and said something else about the item that they were selling. And then when still didn't hear back, said, hey, if you're still interested, I'll lower the price. And by the way, price doesn't really matter, but I'll lower the price. And lowered it fairly significantly. This wasn't a super expensive item, but it also wasn't cheap. It was a decent amount of money, and they lowered it quite a bit. And so on the other side, Betty receives this message and is interested in the item, but in the meantime, God is speaking to her, and God is saying to her, this person needs money. This person is in financial, a crisis, but they are in a financial situation where this money could be a big deal to them, kind of thing. So Betty really had the impression God was saying she needs my ask her if she needs money. And Betty's thinking, how do I ask? This is Facebook Marketplace. She doesn't know this person. And by the way, it's pretty clear from the conversation that English probably isn't this person's first language. So Betty's like, well, how am I gonna ask someone I don't know that question? That's really personal. So Betty goes to this person's Facebook page and sees that this lady is with 4 children and thinks, oh, you know what? I'll ask her if she's a single mom. That was her solution to the problem she was dealing with. It's funny how we do that sometimes, right? God will say, do this. And we're like, ooh, that's uncomfortable. And we start molding it to something that's better for us, right? And yet God used it for his purposes. So Betty sends a message back saying, yeah, you know what? Are you a single mom? Because if you are, I'll give you your original asking price. Now, this person very easily could have just said yes, right? They would have got more money. She didn't. She came back and said, no, those pictures are actually of my nephews, one of whom has kidney issues, like in the hospital type kidney issues. That's why I'm here. I actually left my life, my job, my world in the country I used to live in, and I came here to help my sister with her little boy that has these kidney problems. And so, and I didn't want to, I should have, just bear with me. I didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to get the words wrong. So, I grabbed, um, I had Betty send me snippets of the conversation on Facebook so I could make sure that I said it correctly. Now, I want to make sure you understand all she needed to do was reply yes, and she'd have gotten more money. Instead, she answers honestly, no, those aren't my kids. So Betty says, God had me ask you. Now I know why. I will Venmo over, and I'm praying for you, your nephew, and your family. Now, the next message, so she sends the money. The next message is, oh no, you send too much. Maybe you made a mistake. No mistake. You're really sweet, but you don't have to send me more money. I offered you for $35, and for reference, this person had sent, I'll just say, a lot more than $35. Okay? I am truly speechless and in tears. God has used you to remind me that He is there, that He has not left. Thank you for what you have just done for me. I wish that God will multiply it to you. God bless you. And then there's a pause, and she messages again. I just can't stop crying. I've been living through very difficult months with many questions. Today, I woke up wondering when I would feel happy again. With my decision, one of my main concerns is how I will finish the month financially. And as you say, it's not the money, it's the way God works. You have no idea what this kind gesture means to me. I've been praying for the Lord to remind me that He still cares for me. And your generosity was an answer to my prayer. Don't underestimate the power or the creativity of the God that we serve. He is amazing. Not only did He bless that person financially, He blessed that person uh, by encouraging her, and honestly, by just simply reminding her, I got this. Everything's going to be okay. And by the way, that kicked open a door. Betty actually got to meet her because when she went to pick up the item, normally it's the porch pickup, you just go grab it and leave. That lady wanted to meet Betty, and they had a conversation, and basically the gist was, anytime you want to talk about Jesus or anything else, you know how to get a hold of me. It opened the door to share more about Jesus. It's amazing what a small gesture can do, if, especially, this is the big if it's the Lord's will, if it's part of His design. Just stand back and watch the things He will do. So very, very cool fishtail. Thank you to Betty for sharing it. I'll bet you have stories like that too, and we want to hear them because the truth is all of us can be encouraged by being reminded of how awesome our God is. All right, let's go ahead and take the Lord's Supper together. I'm going to go to my go-to passage here. This is Luke 22, 19 and 20. And we had taken some bread and given thanks. He broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is being given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And so right now we take the bread together, remembering how he gave his body for us. And in the same way, he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, "This cup, which is poured out for you, is the new covenant in my blood." So we remember how Jesus let his blood be sacrificed and spilled for us, that we would be in the new covenant with him, which doesn't just offer us, but guarantees us eternal life if we will but follow him. And you may take the cup. All right. The 1980 Olympics gave us what is now dubbed the miracle on ice. And it's funny, I actually remember this happening. I lived in an area that, quite frankly, was not a cold area. I've never worn ice skates in my life. And there was no local hockey team. I'm not a hockey guy, at least, especially then as a kid. I think I was 11 when this happened. Um, I don't think I watched the game, but I do remember that's all anybody talked about for quite a while. The Soviet hockey team, and for reference, the Soviet Union was our arch nemesis. If you were afraid of anything in the world at that point in history in America, you were afraid that the Soviet Union was going to nuke us. I mean, that's, the drills that you did in school, like to get under the desk, were because the USSR had attacked, and that was our mindset. And they, let's just say, stretched the rules a bit. Their national hockey team had the best players in the Soviet Union, and back then pros weren't allowed to play in the Olympics. Um, and the U.S. team, on the other hand, was made up of amateurs and college players. Um, Nobody thought that the Soviet Union could lose, and certainly nobody thought that the U.S. could win the gold. But the U.S. played as a team, and they followed their coach's lead, and that's important. And you probably know the rest of the story. When the two matched up for the gold medal, the U.S. team won, and it's still considered one of the greatest upsets in sports history. All right, it was a big deal. So let's see what that might have to do with today's passages. We're going to be again in Matthew chapter 10. Let's just read the first verse to start. Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and every sickness. All right, let's make sure we're on the same page. Up until this point, Jesus has been performing the miracles. All right? Hasn't been any of his disciples, it's been Jesus. And so Jesus gives his authority both to cast out demons and to heal to his disciples. Now, I'll be honest, we're not gonna get any more really into that at all today. Next week, we're gonna see how that plays out. All right. Um, but I want to take these verses and go a different direction. This is Matthew 10, 2 through 4. Now, the names of the 12 apostles are these: the first, Simon, who is called Peter, and his brother Andrew, and James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, the one who also betrayed him. What I want to talk about today is who were these 12 men? These are the men that Jesus handpicked to be his disciples, right? They didn't come to him asking to be disciples. He picked them. So who would he pick? He could pick anyone in the world. He picked these 12 guys. And I want to talk about them. All right. Um, but before we get into the 12, I want to really quickly talk about who's not a part of the 12. And this is where I think, especially, maybe some of you are brand new to the Bible. There are a lot of people mentioned just in the New Testament. There's lots and lots of people. In fact, I want to say there's 9 different people named Simon. Okay, it's easy to get confused about who the disciples were. And there's some big name folks who aren't disciples. All right, I want to make sure we separate them because I think it's really common that people think, oh, this was one of the disciples. All right, so these are some folks who are not disciples. The first is Paul, right? So the Apostle Paul, he wrote about 28% of the New Testament. It would be easy to think, well, he must have been one of the 12. He's not. In fact, he did not personally meet Jesus until after Jesus had died, been resurrected, and ascended back to heaven. He never met him as a man on earth. All right? So not only did he not meet him, he was an enemy of Jesus. Okay? And just want to dispel this, sometimes people call him the 12th apostle. And they have a reason, and I won't get into that because we could spend a bunch of time there. We're not going to do that. But he was not. He is not the 12th apostle. And by the way, those two words in this context can be used interchangeably, apostle and disciple. All right, the second is Luke, right? Luke was a historian and a physician. He's a Gentile, not a Jew, okay? And he wrote what we call the book of Acts, and he wrote Luke, a gospel of Jesus, all right? And you'll notice if you read Luke, it reads as historical nonfiction. It reads like a history book because it is. He was literally tasked with gather the facts of the story about Jesus and then the church after Jesus goes to heaven, okay? Luke is not one of the 12. The other that's commonly, I think, thrown in there is Mark, who is also called John Mark, all right? So Mark was a companion of Paul's. He was the cousin of Barnabas, who was a very close companion of Paul's. He actually deserted Paul on Paul's first missionary journey. Mark and Paul have a falling out, and Paul's really upset about it. In fact, won't even work with him anymore, saying he's not trustworthy to, follow through on what he says he'll do. I don't want to have anything to do with working with Mark or John Mark. But that trust at some point was regained. In fact, it must have been a pretty remarkable turnaround because not only was Paul and Mark's relationship restored, but Mark authored what we call the gospel according to Mark. The book of Mark was written by this Mark, not one of the 12. All right. So now that we know who the disciples were not, let's talk about the ones that actually were part of the 12. And these you will find as we go through this are 12 ordinary men. In fact, one of my favorite extra biblical books that's not the Bible, about the Bible, is a book called 12 Ordinary Men. And I couldn't remember, did my mother give this to me or did my stepfather, her husband, give this to me? And I figured that out because it was written the year after my mother died. So it was definitely my stepfather because my mom was gone. And if you could get close enough, you would see this book has been used. It has a worn spine. It has worn pages. I've spent a lot of time in that book. It's a book that really gave me a different perspective on who the followers of Jesus are. Because you would think Jesus gets to pick anyone in the world. He's going to pick those who are most qualified, at least as man thinks of qualifications. And boy, does he not. To quote the author, who, by the way, is John MacArthur, that's a little bit ironic because I'm not, of all the big name pastors I usually don't agree with, it's John MacArthur, who just passed away. But this book is really, really good. If you want to pick it up, I suggest doing that. But he calls them helplessly human and remarkably unremarkable. That's how John MacArthur described the 12 disciples. The other thing I want to just kind of put in perspective, because we almost never talk about this, is the age of the disciples. Jesus was 30 when he started his ministry and started picking the disciples. It was normal for a teacher to choose people who were chronologically younger than him. The Bible doesn't tell us how old they were, so we don't know, but we can make some assumptions. We can make some assumptions that at the oldest, they were probably 29 or 30. It is unlikely, possible, but unlikely they were older than Jesus. They would have needed to be old enough to make their own decisions about traveling outside of their parents' home, which probably put them in their teens at least. So they're probably between like 15, 16 and 29 or 30. Okay. I think we have a tendency to think of them as older, very mature men. These are young men, possibly high school or college age men who were the 12. And I just want us to keep that in mind as we go through. All right. So the first is Simon, AKA Peter. Jesus would change Simon's name to Peter, and Peter was a fisherman. I mean, that's what he did. It was a sun up to sundown every day except the Sabbath day job. It was a hard job. It was physical, blue collar labor job. Um, it didn't smell good. You were sweaty. It was not a glamorous job either. Okay. He was a fisherman. And I love what MacArthur refers to him as. He calls him the apostle with a foot shaped mouth because he was constantly sticking his foot in his mouth. One of the reasons I love that Jesus chose Peter is because my personality is very similar to Peter's. I'm careful today because I have so many times spoken before I thought things through. Okay. And Peter was the same way. Peter says a lot of stuff that, ooh, bye. He probably wants that one back. In fact, the strongest recorded rebuke that Jesus ever gives in the Bible, he gives to Peter. Okay. Peter would publicly deny Christ 3 times after the crucifixion, and yet he was chosen to lead the church. He was God's choice for a primary leader of the church after he went to heaven. Okay. He's also one of 3 that are the inner circle of Jesus, one of his closest 3 friends, disciples, whatever you want to call them. All right. Almost every story that involves Jesus, Peter is close by. Now, the second I want to talk about is Andrew. And Andrew was also a fisherman, and he was Peter's brother. Okay. There's a couple sets of brothers amongst the disciples, and Andrew is one of them. And he was the very first to be called by Jesus. Jesus calls Andrew first. And Andrew's first task, or his first response to being called as a disciple, is to go get his brother and to introduce him to Jesus. That's literally the first thing that Andrew does. And over the years, he would introduce many, many, many people to Jesus. All right. He would definitely become a fisher of men. He's sometimes referred to as the fourth of the 3 who are in the inner circle. All right. Some people argue, there was 4 people in Jesus' inner circle. Some argue 3. Either way, he's number 4. Okay? Um, he was a guy who worked from the background. He wasn't like his brother. He wasn't the center of attention. All right? And I think sometimes for those of you who also work from the background, you're not the person who wants to, you know, gain all the limelight. You're not the one that takes control of the room who probably, you're not somebody who's like, I wish I could be on camera the way John is right now. If that's not you, if you're like, oh, that's like the last thing I'd want to do, I like to be in the background. Sometimes men, especially, might think of themselves, well, I'm maybe not as manly as Peter. And I hope Andrew never thought that, because the name Andrew actually means manly. All right. He was a very, very important person to Jesus. He would, like all the disciples, he would go out and he would share Jesus. And for his trouble, he eventually was crucified on an X-shaped cross, unlike his brother, who was crucified upside down. Peter actually, according to tradition, didn't want to be crucified the way Jesus was and made them or talked them into crucifying him upside down. At least that's what tradition says. All right, the next in line is James. James is John's older brother. We'll talk about John in a second. Also a fisherman. All right, in the same area. It's almost impossible that Peter and Andrew didn't know James and John. Okay, and he and his brother, James and his brother, were called the sons of thunder. These were not, church mice. These were loud, strong, maybe even reckless people. Okay, people who jumped before they thought about where they were jumping to, okay? And James is also one of the 3 in Jesus' inner circle. Ironically, we know very little else about him, almost nothing, although he is the only one who is specifically mentioned in Scripture as having been martyred, and he was beheaded with a sword. Okay? He's the only apostle death recorded in the Bible. So all the other ones that I talk about are what extra biblical or outside the Bible history tells us. The church kept a lot of records. They don't always agree with one another because the church was all over the world, but we have a lot of history. And so I think we can be reasonably sure that most of them are pretty accurate, okay? But James lost his head, literally, for his faith. His brother was John. John, definitely one of the 3 inner circle. He is the author of the Gospel according to John. He is the author of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and he is also the author of Revelation, or the revelation of Jesus Christ. He was the adopted father, my word, not Bible's word, of Mary, Jesus' mother. When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he literally told John, this is your mother, and to Mary, this is your son. In other words, John, I'm leaving. Take care of mom while I'm gone. Okay? That's how close Jesus and John were. They were very, very close. You may not know this. If you read the book of John, it should immediately be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. He's sometimes referred to as the apostle of love. He uses the word love a lot, and it's agape, God-like love, not eros, physical love. But maybe that'll give you a slightly different kind of perspective the next time you read the book of John. Now, tradition says that he was thrown into a giant vat of boiling oil. They tried to martyr him by boiling him in oil, but miraculously he survived that. I don't know if you want to survive that, but he did. And he's the only one of the 12 who died of natural causes. Now, he died of natural causes while he was exiled on Patmos, a little island near Greece. Some people say because Jesus loved him so much, he didn't have him die literally for his face. He wasn't crucified, he didn't get beheaded. He did get thrown into boiling oil, though, so he certainly had the experience of being martyred, whether he died or not. But a lot of people say because Jesus loved him so much, he died of natural causes. God let him live out the rest of his life. I actually have come to believe the opposite. When we share in Jesus' suffering, we become more like Jesus. The Bible tells us that on multiple occasions. The process of giving oneself for Jesus makes us more like him and brings us closer to him. So think about John. John spent the last years of his life, and he was probably in his 90s. He spent the last years of his life alone in a cave. No one to help him, no one to talk to, no one to encourage him or for him to encourage. And John is a people person, someone who loves people. See, for a people person, like I think about how all of the apostles die. If I could pick, I would not choose to live alone in a cave. That's almost a fate worse than death to a people person. So I look at it differently than many do. But that's how John died. The next in line is Philip. Philip was a secondary leader. When you look at the lists, including the one we just read, of the apostles, you'll always find him listed fifth. Okay? And I said that, remember, James, John, Peter, Andrew, first four, he's always number 5, which indicates he was the leader of the next group. All right? Whether it was all the rest of them or the next 4 or however that worked, he was a leader amongst them, a secondary leader. Ironically, we don't know his Jewish name. Philip is a Greek name. We don't even know his Jewish name. Oftentimes we hear both. For them, we never know his. And he would have known Peter and Andrew because he's from the same area. And he was probably a fisherman. Okay, we don't know. Doesn't say, but he was probably a fisherman. What we do know is he was a process guy. He was this is how you do things in the order of how you do things. He was a process guy. In my world, I'd call him an ops guy or an operations guy. If he was in corporate America, he'd probably be a COO, the chief operating officer. He was a process guy. And Philip would end up crucified like Jesus. Next is Bartholomew, also called Nathanael. He was a friend of Philip's. So again, probably a fisherman. You see a pattern here. This is not a glamorous job. It's not like people went down the street and said, "Oh, look, mommy, a fisherman." It was probably more like, "What is that smell?" "Oh, it's a fisherman." Okay? So he was probably a fisherman, but one of the things that we can imply that we can infer from the Bible is that he probably studied with Philip. Okay? Philip knows things about him that just lead us to believe he probably studied with him, and they would have studied the Torah or part of what we call the Old Testament. All right. And for his trouble sharing the good news, he was flayed alive and then crucified. Now, if you don't know what flayed means, don't look it up because it might make you sick to your stomach to know what that means. So just let it go. But he was martyred in a horrible way. All right. The next is Thomas. He's the person we get the term doubting Thomas from. Oh, you're just a doubting Thomas. You don't believe anything unless someone proves it to you. And he was. He's definitely a pessimist. He's a worrier. Okay. And some of you can relate to that. And I actually have one person who I coach that's someone that I that's part of my job, my regular vocation, one of my clients. And when we first started working together, because he knows he's a pessimist, he knows he's a worrier, he thought that was bad. Like, oh, I wish I weren't. It's like, no, no, no. God made you the way he made you, and he made you that way on purpose. You have a predisposition to not believe, which means you examine evidence more closely than most. That's not a bad trait. It's just a trait. Okay. And so if you have one of those traits that, oh, I wish God didn't make me that way. Don't think that. God made you the way he made you on purpose, regardless of how the world looks at however he made you. God made you with a purpose in mind. All right. Now, I think he's the last one. He also was probably a fisherman. All right. From the same area, from the same group, probably another fisherman. When I went to India, every church it seemed like I went by, and there was actually, in the part of India I was in, there were actually some Christians, and they all had Thomas's name on them. Church of, kind of like how here we have, like the Catholic churches usually have an identifier, Church of the Sacred Mary or whatever. Lots of the churches had his name because he took the gospel to India. That's where he went. And he did an amazing job spreading the gospel. To this day, Indians credit him with bringing them the good news. All right. He was killed with a spear. So, run through with a spear. He died a little differently than the rest, but again, martyred for his faith. Then we get to Matthew, and Matthew, of course, was a tax collector. We've talked about Matthew a lot. I won't get into it other than to remind you or to tell you, in case you're not familiar with how a tax collector was looked at in their society. He was considered a traitor. He was hated by the Jews. He was despised. His vocation was about as low as they get. So he was hated by his people, and yet he authored the book that we're reading right now. This passage was written by Matthew, the tax collector. All right. He was killed with a sword, maybe a dagger. Either way, he was also stabbed to death. All right. The next is James. Now, this is James, the son of Alphaeus. Yeah, we don't know anything about him. We literally, other than these lists, he's not mentioned anywhere. So we know almost nothing about him. We do know that, like the others, he was willing to give his life. In his case, he was stoned and then clubbed to death, but he was also martyred for his faith. And here's a little, just in case you didn't know, they don't kill you unless they hate you, right? You have to do something to get their attention if they're going to go out of their way to murder you, all right? So he probably was a great evangelist. He certainly caused a stir the day he was killed for Jesus. And again, he was chosen by Jesus. That's enough, right? And I almost wonder, like, if James and Peter were having a conversation, James might say, "Man, you're mentioned all through the Bible. He doesn't say anything about me." Peter probably would respond by, "Have you read what he wrote about me? Usually it's because I'm doing something stupid, right? Usually I've stuck my foot in my mouth. Yeah, I did some cool stuff that's recorded in the Bible, but I did some, wow, not very, you know, praiseworthy stuff that's in there too. I kind of wish that wasn't there. It might be better just to be silent, but we don't know much about James. He'll be interesting to talk to, right? When you get to heaven, when you have a chance to speak with him. And if you go to heaven, you actually will. Isn't that cool? That we'll actually be able to talk to these guys. The next is Thaddeus. Now, you may not realize this because almost everything we know about Thaddeus comes from extra biblical history, from non-Bible history. All right. Thaddeus was known by three different names. Okay, he had three, a name and a couple nicknames, or Hebrew name, Greek name, nickname, but they all have a similar meaning. And it's some form of some allusion to having a sensitive heart. Thaddeus was a sweet guy, a nice guy. The guy that I don't know what it is about you. I just feel like I can talk to you. Someone who loves you, doesn't judge you, is just easy to talk to. He was a sweet guy. He was sawed in half for his faith. That's how he would die, not on the top of my list of ways to die. All right, then we have Simon the Zealot. Now, there was a political group called the Zealots in this area at this time. The Bible doesn't specifically tell us if that's where he got his nickname. Could he have just been zealous for the Torah or zealous for Jesus? It's possible, but I think probably he was a zealot. He was from their group. They were a political group. They were not just hoping for, they were praying for constantly the coming of Messiah. All right, so first of all, Simon would have been very open to this is Messiah. He's not in it's been hundreds of years, who knows when he'll come. That would not have been his predisposition. He would have been looking for Messiah, but he was looking for a Messiah who would come and overthrow Rome for the Jews' benefit. All right? So they literally would make plans to and murder Roman officials. They were an aggressive, militant type political group who wanted to overthrow Rome and wanted all the pieces in place so that when Messiah came or would come, they would be ready to overthrow Rome. That would have been what he was all about. Other than that, again, we know almost nothing about him. Interesting story, though. In the 4th century, St. Jerome, an important person in our church's history, I'll just leave it at that, mistranslated his name. Not as Simon the Zealot, but as Simon the Canaanite, and believed that he was from Cana. That led others to believe that he was at the first miracle, which was the water into wine miracle, which happened in Cana. In fact, that led to he must be Simon, the half brother of Jesus. So they had gone from Simon the Zealot because of a mistranslation all the way to Simon was the half brother. In other words, Joseph, as in Mary and Joseph, was the father of Simon, that he was that Simon. He was not that Simon. In fact, that's what you could just say. When you talk about Simon the Zealot, no, not that Simon. There's a whole bunch of Simons, including Peter, right? So back to him being a zealot. And by the way, if you don't know that Jesus had 4 half brothers, it's an interesting little study. Go back, you'll find the names of all 4 in the Bible. One is James, who wrote the book of James. Okay, and some people think that it's the James that was one of the 12. No. The person that wrote the book of James is Jesus' half brother, who didn't even believe in Jesus until after he rose from the dead. Okay, that'll get your attention. My brother's dead, now he's alive. Wait a minute. All this time I've been saying you were a kook. Who are you now? All right. You might be really interested to know the other brother's name. One won't surprise you and one will. And no, it's not the same one. And I'll just leave it at that and let you find it on your own. All right. Something for you to do this afternoon. I will tell you that Egypt, Iberia, which would be like Spain, Portugal, and England all claim he brought the gospel to them and died there. And perhaps he went to all 3. Maybe. It's possible. But he only died in one place, obviously. And the most credible is that he died in England, because we know he definitely brought the gospel to England and he was crucified there. At least that's what we believe happened. That's what history tells us. And all 3 of those histories, by the way, all say he was crucified. The question is where. And it was Probably England. And you think about it, look at a map. That's a long way. There's a long way to go on foot, on a camel, on a sailboat. It's a long way to England from Jerusalem, all right? The last of the original 12 is, of course, Judas Iscariot, the betrayer, the one who traded 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus. Just as prophecy said he would, which is so interesting to me because he would have known that prophecy. Any good Jew would have known that the betrayer of the Messiah was going to do it for 30 pieces of silver, and that's exactly what Judas did. Now, we won't be able to ask him that, though, because he currently resides in hell and will be there for all eternity. So we don't get to ask him, why or what he was thinking when he did that, but he did. Now, after Judas hung himself, that's how he died, there were two candidates that met the criteria that the other 11 set up as how do we choose his replacement. We're going to go back to 12. How do we choose number 12? And the criteria was pretty simple. You have to have been with Jesus since the beginning of his ministry and been present at his ascension into heaven. For whatever reason, that's what the 11 decided were the criteria of replacing Judas. Two men qualified. The one they ended up choosing was Matthias. So Matthias is actually the 12th disciple. We don't know anything else. We have no more biblical history about him. Extra biblical history tells us that he was stoned and then beheaded for his trouble. All right. So what did they all have in common? What did the 12 all have in common? And I'm going to quote that book that I showed you a minute ago. They were available and obedient to the master's call. That's what they all have in common. They were available and they were obedient. And availability is a personal choice, right? They were available and they were obedient. And what did they accomplish? They spread the gospel through the known world. 12 guys. I can't even imagine. Think about for a second. If we were to say, you know what? There's 8 million people, a little more than that, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We need to make sure all 8 million have heard the good news. And we get together a team, and there's going to be 12 of us that are going to pull that off. Really? 12 people? No radio, no TV, no internet. Somehow, some way, 12 people are going to tell 8 million people about Jesus? They did it. Obviously, not everyone by themselves. They would train disciples who trained disciples who trained disciples and multiplied Christians. In 2004, if you would have gone to Google Answers and said, how many Christians were there by the end of the first century, by 100 AD? So Jesus crucified, 33 AD, the last 67 years. How big was the church? If you Googled it in 2004, it would have told you about a million Christians. Google it today, and AI will tell you, yeah, between 7 and 10,000. Really? Don't forget, Peter had 3,000 converts on the very first day he preached on the day of Pentecost. And then within a very short time that you could measure in days, there were 5,000 Christians reported in the Bible just in Jerusalem. And yet AI will tell you that there were 7 to 10,000. If you don't think that AI is intentionally telling you wrong, you're wrong. All right. So evidence tells us, just based on the gospel's impact, that probably the first number is more likely, or something like how many there were. That's pretty amazing. In less than 7 decades, something like 1 million people had heard the good news. That was a significant piece of the population at that point in history. All right. How they do that? Because they all worked with the Holy Spirit and did what he led them to do. It's that simple. They were obedient to the Holy Spirit who led them where he led them, told them to say what to say, and they did it. So that's great. We know who they were, but who are we? Let's think about SteepleLess Church. Just us. Who are we? To the best of my knowledge, now who knows who's watching online that hasn't raised their hand and identified themselves. There's lots of you. Um, we get a couple thousand a week or a month that go to our website, 2 to 3,000. I don't know who all of you are, but I do know that outside of the couple elders we have, there's no one seminary trained that I'm aware of. We have retail workers, we have business people, we have teachers, we have nurses, we have administrators, we have people with military background, we have bookkeepers, we have retirees, and we have students, among other common vocations. We are kind of just a cross section of everybody. We're not unique. We're pretty ordinary in terms of what we do and how we do it. But as a team, just the people we know that are part of SteepleLess, these are the spiritual gifts that we have. We have the gift of prophecy. We have the gift of administration. We have the gift of leadership. We have the gift of shepherding. We have the gift of teaching, the gift of preaching, the gift of mercy, the gift of giving, the gift of evangelism, the gift of service, and the gift of exhortation at a minimum. Those are the ones we already know. Wow. Look how God has equipped just the few of us that we know about. Now, maybe you have no idea what your spiritual gift is. Go to our website, steepleLessChurch.com. There's a header. Find More is one of the tabs there. Hover on it or click on it, and underneath it you will find Spiritual Gifts Test. It's free. You can share it with as many people as you want. We've had 4,700 people so far take that spiritual gifts test, which is very, very cool. Most of which we don't know. Okay? So when I talked about those spiritual gifts, I was just talking about the people I do know, the regulars. What have we done? What has SteepleLess done? Well, as a group, we've been directly involved in scores of people making professions of faith and following Jesus. And that's more important than anything else we could have done. Scores, multiple scores of people we know have come to faith because of the people here at SteepleLess. We've helped hundreds, possibly thousands of people in need financially, spiritually, physically, or emotionally. We've been able to help many people. The person I called Betty, just in the last couple days, has had an impact on another woman's life through Facebook Marketplace. Not exactly what you might design for I want to have kingdom impact today. I'm going to go to Facebook. Yeah, probably not, especially to buy something. But that's how God used it. And we're just scratching the surface. We really are just scratching the surface of what God plans to do through SteepleLess Church. So in closing, I want you to know that with God, you can accomplish anything in his will. Anything, even changing the world, literally, even changing the world. But I also want you to examine yourself and determine how far you're willing to go. I didn't tell you about all those martyrdoms to scare you. I wanted you to understand how far these men were willing to go. They were all in. They were all in regardless. And you have to decide where you are on the spectrum. You might choose to keep your faith to yourself. And the world won't hate you, but you also won't accomplish anything either. and you will be disobeying God, and that could have dire consequences. Maybe you'll do some work for Jesus. Maybe you'll decide, okay, I'll do some. I'm not all in, but I'll do something. And the world will at least dislike you for that. And you may accomplish a little, but if you're all in, if you are all in for Jesus, the world will hate you. But you will see God change the world through you. How amazing will that be? And are you willing to go all in, even if it means giving everything for Jesus, even if it means your life? Are you that all in? Let's pray about that right now. Lord, you made each and every one of us for a purpose. You wrote a story about every single man, woman, and child's life. You wrote an amazing story about each of us. And you wove our stories together. And we will encounter things that are divine, even on something as simple as Facebook Marketplace. Just in the last couple of weeks, we have prayed that you would send more workers to the harvest because the harvest is plentiful. There are lots and lots of people who are open to and want to know the truth about God. And there are few of us willing to go and work. But Lord, we know because your word says that you will use us to encourage one another. Lord, I pray that you would use us. Those of us who go, those of us who want to tell the world about Jesus, I pray that others would be encouraged. Those who are on the fence, those who are thinking about how much will I give up to follow Jesus, that we would be an encouragement, that they would want to walk with us as we walk with you. It's in your son's precious name we pray. Jesus. Amen. All right. So what? Now what? Are you all in? Are you ready to go all in? Are you willing to change the world for Jesus? And that's not hyperbole. Are you willing to change the world for Jesus? Maybe you don't know Jesus. Maybe you're ready to meet him for the first time. If any of those things describe you, please reach out to us. We would love to talk to you. All right, home groups, go ahead and do the call to action questions now with your group. If you're not part of a home group, go to our Facebook page during the week and we will post them. I think Tuesday now we're going to do them a little bit different. I think, is that right? Tuesday is now the awesome call to action questions will be posted on Tuesday now on our page. All right. This week we learned who the disciples are. Next week we're going to learn about Jesus sending them out into the world for the first time, so don't miss that. It's a great story. Thank you for being part of the SteepleLess Church family. We love you, and we'll see you next week.